Good evening. This is a class about prophecy. Since we've been discussing prophecy by the words of Maimonides, and of course Rambam is fascinating over and over and over again for me, because each time I learn Maimonides, there's new insights. There's a very, very famous dispute between Maimonides and later generations regarding the prophecy of Abraham. The Arabs, of course, call him Ibrahim, but it doesn't make a difference whether you call him Ibrahim or Avraham or Abraham. He's still the father of the Jewish people. Now, Abraham, Avraham, had a circumcision. Prior to the circumcision, he was not able to see God except by a vision in a dream. Once he was circumcised, God was able to appear to Abraham while it was daytime, while he was awake. Because the process of circumcision was able to purify the vessel so that he could receive directly from godliness. That being said, the week's Torah portion begins with the words, "And God appeared to Abraham." And it doesn't say what the nature of that appearance was. And so we have, as with many things in the Torah, differences of opinion. Sometimes the opinions can coalesce. You can have both opinions side by side. But this is a question that there cannot be side by side. It's either one is right or the other is right. We have studied that besides Moses, all of the prophets, including Abraham, Avraham, their prophecy was through an angel, through a malach. And the reason for that writes Maimonides in the very famous 8 chapters that he wrote when he was a teenager. An incredible treatise on human emotion and human development. Maimonides writes that the difference between Moses and all other prophets was that all other prophets had an emotional disability. They were imbalanced emotionally. That doesn't mean that they were sick people. That means that they had an emotion which was stronger than it should have been and was not in harmony with the others. For example, Abraham, Avraham, Ibrahim, loved everyone, including his son Ishmael, who at that time was not such a nice guy. And so the fact that Avraham loved all of God's creatures, irrespective of their standing, as far as whether they were upstanding citizens, that's a defect. And as a result, he does not get the word of God clearly, says Maimonides. And therefore, the appearance of God to Abraham was in the vision of the 3 angels. So in other words, the 3 angels coming to Abraham was just a vision. Nachmanides, Rabbi Moses ben Nachman, takes exception to this interpretation of Maimonides and says that if this is true, that the vision of God was in the form of the 3 angels coming, then Lot, later on, and the entire city of Sodom and Gomorrah, that entire despicable group, merited to become prophets, according to Maimonides. Because according to Maimonides, prophecy is through the office of an angel. They saw the angels, therefore they must have been prophets. How does that work? In order to be a prophet, you have to be a very great philosopher and a holy person. And therefore, he negates it. And he also says that the Talmud tells us that Daniel is not considered one of the prophets because all Daniel did was speak to an angel. He did not speak directly to God. So what do you think Maimonides' response would be to this? Now, this is a very, very terrible indictment of the veracity of his statement that Maimonides says that this is the prophecy is the vision of the angels, and Lot and the city of Sodom, who were not stellar people by any stretch of the imagination, how could they have seen the angel and become prophets? Furthermore, the Talmud tells us that Daniel was not a prophet because he only saw the angel. How does that jive with the interpretation of Maimonides? And so I will tell you, I will answer this question by another question that we have on Maimonides. And that is in the laws of, somewhere in the laws of idol worship, Maimonides says that there is no such thing as a demon, that it is a figment of people's imaginations, and only sick people and unhealthy people, such as children and women, would imagine that there's such a thing as a demon. People who are healthy, of good constitution, would never imagine there's such a thing as a demon. And so Maimonides is of the opinion that demons do not really exist. Demons are figments of people's imagination. And along comes the entire wrath of the rabbinic world against Maimonides. How dare he when the Torah talks about demons? And the Talmud is filled in many pages with stories about demons. In fact, there's a cartoon character in the Jewish press called Ashmedai, who was utilized by none other than King Solomon. And there's a whole story, in the whole story of King Solomon, how he gets trapped by Ashmedai, and Ashmedai takes over the kingdom. How Solomon comes back. All of that story, according to Maimonides, is the healthy figment of the imagination of the rabbi who told it. How does that fit in with our belief in the veracity of the words of the Talmud, that are filled with stories about the demons and the wrath of rabbinic opinion against them? Has a long list, but I will quote you what the Vilna Gaon said. Ha-philosophia harura shaloi hitose. His accursed philosophy has caused him to err. And so, how do we answer Maimonides? Well, we don't have to answer Maimonides. He was asked the question by the great scholars of the past, and he answered them, that all of these stories are stories written by people who held one opinion, that demons are real. But there are others who hold that demons are not real, and I conclude like those others. So in other words, Maimonides is telling us that many times the rabbis will quote an opinion, but that need not necessarily be the final opinion. Therefore, the fact that Daniel is not considered a prophet by one opinion in the Talmud does not negate the possibility that in the end, Daniel is still a prophet, because all prophecy except for Moses comes through an angel. The fact that Lot, not such a stellar individual, or the people of Sodom, even less stellar, would be able to see prophecy is no great chidush. It's not a new thing. We find this with Cain. Cain had just murdered his brother in cold blood, and God comes and speaks to him. What is that? That's prophecy. God speaking to you is prophecy. And so, it's not a wonder that God comes and appears to Lot and the people of Sodom, because God is testing them, as God tested Cain.